I've also lived in those front rooms. They're the coldest rooms in the building. Those big windows with the nice stained glass, they're pretty to look at, but they suck in terms of insulation.
I'll take the windows.
Yeah, yeah. All righty. So good morning, everybody. And thanks for joining us. Kind of rentals Q&A. I know that I've been fielding a bunch of these kind of offline, and so has some of the staff, and so has some of the ALC. So I thought it was kind of best to just give everybody a forum for as long as we need to kind of ask and have answered questions regarding rentals, whether that's process or law or credit or whatever questions you might have. So it's really your time to fill. I will open it up to you guys. What questions do you have in terms of rentals?
Hey, Chris,
John.
Rick, sorry, oops. One of my questions that I had is, so I have a client who is using Unite CT. It's like the COVID rental assistance stuff.
Yep.
I never even heard of that until she sent me an email. So how does that work?
Well, she's using it for what?
For a rental assistance. She said she already got pre-approved with them, and that she's getting it's, I guess, $15K in rental assistance throughout the year for the year. And like another, I think like $1,250 in assistance for like utilities.
Okay, so she's using it for proactive, right? My experience with it has been for helping people who are behind on back rent get caught up. And so she's using it to start and go proactive moving forward. She's getting that kind of assistance.
That's what it seems like.
Okay. And so I wasn't aware you could use it that way, just PS, and it doesn't mean that you can't. So if in fact, just like any other rental assistance scenario, whether it's state or local, federal, whatever it is, there should be documentation. You use it just like any other rental assistance opportunity, where you make your offer, you make your offer being clear that the rent will either be paid by Unite CT. I think what they do, if I'm not mistaken, is the way that works is if she's getting forward rent, she needs to connect with a landlord, because I don't think they pay her. I think they pay the landlord.
Yeah,
right.
In the email, she kind of had it stated, I guess, that they paid the first 3 months rent and 1 month security up front, and then they pay in 3-month increments.
Yeah. So you just need to be upfront with the landlords when you're writing offers for her, that's where it's coming from. And you shouldn't have a struggle. It's a lawful source of income. It's not like, I mean, frankly, if someone came to me and said Unite CT was going to pay 3 months up front and then 3-month chunks, 3 more times a year, I'd be like, all day long and twice on Tuesday, right? It's kind of guaranteed money. Just be certain she has the backup documentation, and do yourself a favor, submit that with any offer. Be way upfront about it. Don't make the offer, agree, and then come back and say, oh, by the way, this is how it's going to work, because nobody likes surprises. Just be upfront with the documentation.
And then does it have any I know like Section 8, they have the inspection contingency kind of with Section 8. Is there something like that with Unite CT or no?
Not to my knowledge. I have used Unite CT, again, more for back rent and some forward rent for current tenants, and some utility assistance for current tenants. There was no inspections for just forward rent. My guess is no, because I don't think the state has the manpower to actually facilitate inspections up front. What else? Great question.
I have a bunch more questions lined up. I can start firing away if no one else has questions.
So I can add to that a little bit, because I just received an email from someone. This is the first time I've heard of Unite CT as well. And she sent me an email stating, so I think they get pre-screened for eligibility, and I don't think they can be fully approved until they have a contract or something from the landlord. I think so. She says I have a case number, but without a landlord agreement and their contact info, I can't proceed from eligible to applied status to enrolled status. So I think that might be how the process works.
Yeah, that's 100% right, because even with, we had a scenario with a current tenant whose lease had expired, and we had to actually, it was kind of an interesting scenario, because we were looking to get rid of them because they weren't paying. They refused to apply for Unite CT or even have us apply for them, because they refused to sign a new lease. And without a new lease, without a connection to a landlord, Unite CT does not pay, right? And so it is that connection with the landlord that moves the whole process forward. And until or unless you can prove you're connected with the landlord via a lease, it gets it. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
that's
then,
100% right.
so they basically provide you with their pre-eligibility status, then you would present their offer to the landlord after, doing normal stuff like credit checks and employment, or all that stuff. Landlord says yes, they write up a lease, sign it, then they give it to Unite CT.
Yeah, and I guess the one question I would have, and I don't know the answer to this, is an accepted offer to lease, a fully executed offer to lease, enough to have Unite CT move them forward in the process to approve? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
We had to utilize a lease, but again, it was for an existing tenant. So
Gotcha.
my guess, if the government was even this much smart, my guess is that they're going to look for a lease, because anybody could have a fully executed offer to lease.
Mhm.
But without an actual lease document, you don't really have. That's the vehicle that ties the parties together, not the offer. So my guess is that they're going to look for a lease. What else?
Rick, another question.
Yes.
In terms of like showing apartments and stuff like that, when I'm like dealing with clients, do I like set them up on the automated MLS email so they could see the properties and then have them pick out the ones that they want to see? Or do I ask them like, hey, when are you free? And then bang out properties in that time block that they're free?
Yeah, so good question. I think my answer to that is you do both. I think that automating the search and including them in that automation is a great tool. However, what I find is that there are some agents who overuse that tool, and they're not paying attention to opportunities that come up. They're just waiting for the client to come and say, hey, I want to see that one. And here's what's real. After the first 3 or 4 or 5 days of getting those daily emails, the clients start to pay attention to them less and less and less, right? It's like the novelty is there up front, but then it just becomes part of their day, and they don't look at it until lunchtime, or sometimes they don't look at it until dinner time, and then they miss a day, and then they miss 2 days, and then all of a sudden it's a week, right? Right? It's like the emails that I send to all you guys. At some point, it's just like it's another email from Rick, and you don't open it, right? It's why I do my best to try and get the message across in the subject line. I don't know if you've noticed that I do that, right? But oftentimes the body of my email is empty, or is just repetitive from the subject line, because I know over time it's just another email from Rick, and people just don't open it. That's how your clients start to treat those automated emails. So set them up so that you can have them see it, and there will be some who will be on it, but a lot of them won't be. The other side of that is you need to be vigilant on the MLS, or however you're searching for property, 4 or 5 times a day, to make sure that you have, if something new and awesome comes on, that you're on the phone with them to say, hey, you know what, something just came on, it's not even in your report, you need to take off work early so we can go and see that and get you in there.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, and that would go the same too when eventually I start dealing with buyer clients as well, right? Same thing.
100%. 100%. Yeah, automation is awesome. If you rely too much on it, however, you end up missing the boat, and what comes back at you from the buyer or the tenant perspective is, why didn't you tell me about that one? And then the defense is sometimes, well, it was in the morning email. Well, that's not what I'm paying you for. I'm paying you for you to be on top of the inventory, right? And so
Mm.
you being on top of the inventory means you're the one who's monitoring that 3, 4, 5 times a day and reaching out to me if there's something we have to jump on, not waiting for it to show up the next morning in the morning report.
Mhm.
Make sense? Cool. What else?
So I have
Connie,
a
did you have? Yeah, Chris.
quick tip on that is, yeah, so I agree. I would do both, set up the auto email and be proactive. And every auto email I have set up. So if you're on an auto email, I'm also blind carbon copying myself. So I get that most of the time it's a daily update. I don't usually put people on instant. Some people I will, but for the most part, it's a daily update in the morning, every day of the week. And if they receive something, I'm getting a copy of that email so I could see what's in that email. And if I look through it, go through those properties in that email. And if something speaks to you that they like, just reach out at that point and be like, hey, check this out. It's right there right now.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, copying yourself is awesome because you then
Mhm.
get to see what they're receiving. The worst situation is to not copy yourself, have a client reach out and say, hey, you know what? I just saw that thing come through. It looks awesome. Can we go right away? And you're like, absolutely. Which one are we talking about? Right. So when you're copied on them, you get to, instantaneously what they saw and make that follow up. Great idea. Connie, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. It's about Section 8. And I have a client who's on Section 8, but she couldn't seem to get a voucher to me. I ended up having to call Danbury's office, and I was sent a copy of it, but it had an expiration date, which was in August. And she said it was extended, but it doesn't have it printed on the voucher. And I'm not sure if that would even be acceptable to a landlord. So is there something else that I can get? A letter or something?
Yeah, so I can tell you that as a landlord, I wouldn't accept it. If it said it was expired in
Right.
August, I don't, I mean, hear this from where I mean it, like I don't trust anybody, right? So just someone saying, yes, it's extended, that does
Mhm.
not hold water for me. And so so the idea of getting some documentation, either a letter saying it's extended or just having a new voucher
Okay.
written, right? And I'll say this because it at some level, the tenant has to be willing and able to help themselves. And what I mean by that is if the tenant themselves are kind of throw their hands up and say, I don't know how to get my voucher, or I don't know who to call or whatnot, that there are more red flags there than there are with an expired voucher to me. Because the reality is you got this voucher the first time, so you clearly know where it came from. You know who to call. Why aren't you willing to do it? Right. And so
Exactly.
I would just be cautious about, stepping in and calling on behalf of people. I think is more of an enabling activity. And instead, I would, if it's calling, Danbury Housing Authority, because that's where it came from, get the information, call and say, this is the scenario I have. Who would she need to speak with? Get the
Okay.
name and number, and then give it to her and say, they are waiting for your call this afternoon. So please go ahead and call them. Here's what you need to ask them. But
Mhm.
even if you do all the work on the back end, task the client with helping themselves to get that done, because it'll
Okay.
just happen. It'll happen faster, or it won't happen at all. Either
Okay.
way, you know which path you need to go down then.
Hi, Rick.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Sharonda.
Hi. I just wanted to say in regards to that, Section 8 does give another voucher with the extension on it. I deal a lot with the Section 8 clients, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll ask them for their worker's email. I'll have them email me the initial voucher, and they have to request it from Section 8. Section 8 does give them a new one. I think the second one is for another 60 days, and then the third one is for 30 days. But it does have it on there, and I explain to clients, I need to be able to show the landlord this, and I never had a problem with getting it. But if you're on a chain email with their caseworker and you just shoot them an email stating that, they'll get it to you.
I love that. I love that. And the point being there is be involved, but recognize that Section 8 wants to hear from the tenant, and you want the tenant to take some responsibility for obtaining those documents. And the reality is, because I do get asked this question a lot, what do I do if the client doesn't have the right documentation? Well, the answer is you can't move forward, and the client needs to understand that you simply cannot move forward writing an offer, because there isn't a landlord who's going to say, I'll take your word for it. That's just not the way it works, right?
Yeah, and sometimes those clients, they do lie. They lie to get you to do what they want you to do.
Yeah, because they think that by doing so, somehow you might have some magic powers, right? That allow you to make something different happen, even though they're not approved, or they're not getting the money, or they're not approved for as much as they say, right? Unfortunately, people do create their own truths sometimes, right? And you just have to be the arbiter of that sometimes. Well, you need to be the arbiter of that all the time, and just recognize if you don't see the right documentation, neither will the listing agent and neither will the landlord. And so everyone's wasting everybody's time, right, with that.
Eric,
Yes,
I have two questions. First, as it relates to MLS, cross property check and versus auto generated MLS every day. I noticed there's a discrepancy when I manually put in the parameters versus the automatically generated ones. So is it that I have it too narrow on the scale, or in other words, I'm getting more property options when I just manually key in the parameters versus the automatically generated ones? So that's question number one. Number two, close on the sorry.
let's stop with question number one first. Does
Yep.
anybody know the answer to that? I'm going to tell you, I don't know enough about the mechanics of those auto searches. It seems odd to me that if the criteria is identical, the results should be identical. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that, guys?
I mean, I think personally, like the way like it seems when you auto send the emails or whatever at that time is available, whatever, that's what it sends out. So if you manually put in like search up whatever the criteria is anywhere before like or after that time, then the results may be different.
May have changed.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm assuming.
Thanks, John.
Mhm.
No, Rick, number two, closed on the condo about a month
I'm
ago.
sorry, before you get to number two, we'll get there, I promise. The other thing is, remember that usually the way those auto emails are set up, this is just another way to say what John said. It's only sending the new stuff, right? And so you're not getting necessarily the entire, all the results every time. It's what's new, right? And so just watch how you're setting those things up. If someone's looking for all the available inventory, you may have to go in and send that as a manual update.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Stuart. What's number two?
Yep. Second, I closed on the condo about a month ago, and my client still hasn't received his deed in the mail. Is that something that he needs to go to City Hall, or is that something I could retrieve? They wouldn't give it to me, right, to hand to him?
No,
No.
nope,
Okay.
no, unless you were on the deed, you're not going to be able to receive that. And really, that's a question for either the municipality and or that buyer's attorney,
Okay.
right? Because the attorney is the one who's going to file all the was there a mortgage involved?
It was not, it was cash buyer.
Okay, so the attorney is going to then file whatever they need to file directly with the municipality. The municipality is going to write it. How long ago did this happen?
A month ago, and the attorney sent me confirmation that she did file it. That's why yeah.
Yeah, if it's a month, what we'll probably find, what's the town or city?
Stanford?
Yeah, my guess is that he'll get it. He is not going to get it quick, right? The municipalities are still kind of operating in that we're backlogged and people are working from home. Like all the rest of us have moved on and we're just coming to work, but there seems to be this well, it's likely coming. I would have him, right? There's not a task for you. Have him or his attorney check with the municipality.
Okay.
My
Thanks.
guess is the answer is going to be, yep, he'll get it. He'll probably take another month, but he'll get it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Chris, do you have your hand?
Yes. So for section 8, what would be best practices or like any kind of entity that's guaranteeing payment like Unite CT or section 8? What are some best practices around that when either representing that tenant or the landlord? In terms of like, what's the right documentation and process? So like, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll answer that from the landlord's perspective first, and then the tenant side. So what I want to see as a landlord, frankly, is this may say more about me than the process, but what I want to see is as little as possible. I want to see the important documents. Like, so from a Section 8 recipient, I want to see the Section 8 voucher and anything that might need my signature, right? Because a lot of times there's all that supporting documentation that, like, I don't need to see all that. I need to be certain that that I have the things that Section 8 says that I need to have, which certainly is going to be the voucher. And there's a couple of other things that typically the landlord, I think, has to execute.
Moving packet.
Yeah, right. The moving packet. And so the idea of keeping it to what's necessary for the landlord, I think makes sense. The idea of the other way I'll answer that is whatever you're sending, send it all up front. I think people make mistakes with rental assistance, Section 8, local security assistance programs, right? Any of those kinds of assistance programs, in holding back and not letting people know that this is where the money's coming from up front. And they do that because they're afraid that the client will be rejected outright because of those assistance programs, right? I'm going to tell you what, if the landlord is going to make decisions that may violate fair housing rules, they're going to make them whether you do it up front or you do it on the tail end. The only difference is if you do it on the tail end, well, then the client feels like they've made progress, only to be told later on with their source of income that there's going to be a problem. The listing agent and the landlord feel like you ambushed them with information that you didn't think was a big deal to disclose later on. So my advice is just be as upfront as possible about where all the money's coming from. If that creates struggles with landlords or listing agents, that's a separate conversation, right? It's a separate issue. But the proper process is create the documentation that outlines specific, anything that has to be signed by the landlord or gives the landlord information about how and when the money is going to be received and how much they're approved for. All of that upfront in the offer, and then go from there with how the offer is responded to. Is that the question, Chris? Am I answering the right question?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's basically your same normal process, just have readily available, provided by the potential tenant, all the supporting documentation.
Yeah. And here's the other thing I would do is if you're uncertain what the process is, right? If you've never worked with Section 8, call the housing authority and don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm working with Maria Jones, and I just want to be certain that I know the process properly so that when I make the offer on behalf of Maria Jones, I can speak to the listing agent with knowledge. If you don't know the process, you're then sitting back hoping that the client does and hoping the listing agent does. That gets messy. So if it's something new like Unite CT, I'm certain there's a number to call to say, hey, what is your process? Is there anything I need to know? Be as educated as you possibly can around any of these programs. I will tell you that every single time I have a kind of an open conversation like this around those programs, someone says, well, I was working with the city of whatever with this local program that I'd never even heard before, right? There are so many different programs and everyone has a slightly different process that it's hard to just have a class around process for either rental or security assistance because they're all different. My point is, if you have a client who has one of those as their lawful source of either income or security, don't be afraid to get on the phone with whoever is their contact there and ask a bunch of questions, right? Sound as dumb as possible because they'll give you as much information as possible. I mean that tongue in cheek, right? But the idea is don't think that if you don't know it, you shouldn't make a phone call because then everyone will know you don't know it. You need to know what the information is, and the best way to do that is just call the source and ask some clarifying information, for some clarifying information. Does that help?
Thank you.
Sure. John.
To continue the topic of Section 8. So if you get a lead and they mention the qualifying call that they have Section 8, from there, how do you go about asking for their voucher and stuff like that to see and like verify that whatever they're saying is true?
Yeah, Sharonda, what do you do in that scenario?
What I did, I seem to be like the queen of Section 8 people. I get all the Section 8 people. So what I do up front is I go through them with a list of everything that I need. I say, in order to work with me, I'm going to need a copy of your voucher. You're going to need 2 months security. I'm going to need your ID, proof of income. And I just tell them that up front. And I tell them that they're also going to need a credit check. And when I submit offers on their behalf, like Rick said, in the moving packet, there's documents that the landlord doesn't need. I just pull them out and I put together their voucher and the moving packet together when I send their offer, along with the other required information so that they have everything at once. And that way, if they say yes, they're gonna accept the client, they'll just fill out the moving packet right then and there and give it back to you.
And where does this moving packet come from?
The moving packet, so when they go to Section 8 and say that they're going to move, Section 8 has them sit down, do a little seminar or whatever, and they'll give them the voucher and the moving packet. So the moving packet is like a lead form, just saying if there's air conditioning in the units. It has the W-9 for the landlord to send out to give their payment information and like a questionnaire to see if the unit's up to date and it'll be able to pass inspection, a few other things it has, and that they get along with their voucher. And the moving packet is pretty standard, so whether they have a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom or whatever, the moving packet is always going to be the same. So what I did is I saved a copy for myself so that I could always have it. If a client, forgets to send it to me, long as I have their voucher, I'll still send that moving packet with it.
Great idea. Boy, it does sound like you're the queen of Section 8. I'm going to have you teach a class, I think. Yeah, and I love all of that. What Sharonda just walked you through. Herm.
Hi, I have a question for Sharonda. I have a Section 8 adding an occupant, and there's documentation that they sent me that about the move-in condition, but she has already moved in. So do I still need to fill out that?
You're the landlord or the realtor?
Yeah, I represent the landlord, and actually I represented both at the time. This was probably 2 years ago, and then she just reached out to me saying that she's getting a friend to move in with her, her significant other, I think. And everything's all approved, and they have the increase in rent and all the documentation's all set up. But the caseworker sent me like an extra addendum, like move-in condition forms that I never saw in the 2 years ago when we first did this.
I would just call the caseworker, Herm.
Yeah, I don't think that has anything to do with you. Like, they have already moved in. You don't have anything to do with that.
Well, it's because the mate is moving in February, so
Yeah.
they're adding an occupant.
So I've never really heard when things change like that of having to do that kind of stuff all over again. But
Right.
again, I think that the simple path is call the caseworker and say, hey, you sent me this form. Do I need to fill it out? And how do I need to fill it
Yeah.
out?
Okay. All
And
right.
when you guys are put in those scenarios and you're unsure, just pick up the phone and make a simple call. Don't be afraid to sound like you don't know the answer. Because if you
Yeah.
don't know the answer, you just don't know it, right?
Yeah, I did call, but she's not in until next week. So I just,
Oh.
she knew off the top of her head, but if she doesn't,
Yeah.
no big deal. I already did make that call and set up all the questioning, but she's not back until next week. So
And then the other answer is,
wait,
well, if you want to send it all in without it and let them come back and say, we're missing this form.
right, okay.
What else, guys? Anything else?
I had another question, Rick.
Yes, sir.
For the Apply Connect application, there's a section where it says address and property zip. And normally they want, like, at least from the Jen Henry like video, it says to do all the stuff up front, like get all the credit checks and stuff like that, the paperwork signed up front. But what if we haven't found a spot yet? Do we just put in a spot that they seen and they liked, or do we wait until they actually are ready to move forward and put an offer?
And I'm sorry, you're talking about on which
Apply Connect.
document?
Apply Connect on the credit/background check. There's a spot where it says property address.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't matter. You don't have to necessarily run credit for a specific address. If you have one, you can put that address in, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. I would put the office's address. Who cares? It really doesn't much matter. Chris,
Does anyone have a process or like campaign that they use to convert tenants into future buyers? So you work with a tenant, you place them into a lease. Does anyone have a process or systematic like campaign that they're utilizing to stay in touch, convert them, et cetera?
great question. Anybody using something?
Because
I
I'm
just,
really, I think
I
it's an
just follow up,
incredible
you
source.
know. I just put them in the pipeline, and when their lease ends up, maybe 2 to 3 months prior to that, and just check in with them and see, make sure that everything is, they're still employed, and, all, the general, presets for buyers. That's all I do.
You know what I would do? I would, as like a move-in gift, a housewarming gift, I would set them up with a 30-minute free consultation with my mortgage partner. Right? Start the relationship. So like 30 days after they move in, have them gift them a 30-minute consultation, right, with a mortgage partner to do a review about turning you from a renter into a buyer, so that they start that process real early. They know what they have to do. Maybe they have some credit issues. Maybe they have to save for a down payment. Maybe they can get gift money and have it seasoned, earlier. All those things, the earlier the better. And then for me, the follow-ups would be putting them just on my 36 touch. Certainly 6 months into the lease, a verbal touch base if you haven't done one prior, to see what they're thinking about next. And then maybe get them some information. If you're building something, drip them with some information about the tax advantages of owning versus renting, or stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to build out like a drip of emails with like the pre-approval process and tax info, stuff like that, common myths against home buying. I think that's genius what you said though, as a little gift, a free consult.
Yeah, it doesn't cost you anything, and it gets them started with a conversation that, if they wait until 2 or 3 months before their lease is up and they have issues, then I have found that then people get stuck. They're like, oh man, we can't buy right now. We don't want to go another year.
Yeah.
But if they have 11 months before their lease is up, that now all of a sudden they can fix stuff and save, and go to the bank of mom and dad and have the money be transferred. And so now it's seasoned money. They don't have to get gift letters. They can make things so much simpler if they have time ahead of it.
Yeah, and they're introduced to your lender partner who you want them to use, and it'll just be that much familiar when you're closer down the road to reintroduce that.
Yeah, and your lender partner, of course, now knows that you made that intro. And so if they go to the lender instead of directly to you, the lender can put you back in touch with them. The other thing I would do is figure out a way, either push them to one of our larger investment property seminars. Shameless plug, I think we're doing one the third week of January, so watch for dates on that if you want to push your database to that.
Yeah, it's another great idea.
Yeah, so get them starting to think about, because a lot of people who go into a rental think I can't afford to buy a house. Well, one of the things we talk about in that investment seminar is, what if your entree into investment property is to buy a 2-family or a 3-family, you live in one and then rent the others until you're able to then move out and do something else. And now you keep that property as a full-blown investment property. It's about, remember Gary's definition of leadership, right? Because I think that's what Chris's question really is about. It's about, what are we doing to lead people forward, to help them progress financially? And Gary's definition of leadership is teaching people how to think so that they can have what they want when they want it. And really, the process that Chris is talking about is exactly that. How are we helping people who are currently renters think differently, understand the opportunities and the possibilities, and perhaps then take different actions early enough so that 10 or 11 months from now, they're closing on a house and improving their financial standing by doing so.
Yeah, great stuff.
What else? I think Stuart and then John.
Yep, just to add to that, so I did a renter's consultation 2 weeks ago. And of course, I went in on the assumption that he's looking to rent. By the time I was done with the consultation, he saw the logic in actually going for a mortgage and a condo about the same price point, even with the HOA, about $2,000 was his, price point. And he's talking to the mortgage people now. So you never know. I just drop it in their minds, not to sound like a pushy salesperson, but just to let them know that they have options.
Yeah, 100%. And I love the reference to, the pushy salesperson, because guys, I'm going to tell you what, I will be aggressive on behalf of someone's financial well-being all day long, right? Guilty as charged. To me, there's nothing negative about being aggressive on behalf of somebody's financial position, right? Because if they don't know it, or they're unwilling to take those steps, or unwilling to kind of hear some of those things, by you being aggressive about it, you could change somebody's life without even recognizing that you have done that, right? Until 10 years from now, they come back to you and say, I just wanted to say thank you, because 10 years ago, when I was about to rent that condo, and we had that conversation and I bought it, I still own that condo today. It was my first investment property. I now own 50 of them, right? And so all of a sudden, bam, you've changed somebody's life. And just because you chose to take a stand for their finances. So I would do that all day long. Great job. There was so John, I'm going to come to you in just half a second. There was a question in the chat that I got some answers on. Erica asked, how long does an eviction notice stay on credit reports? And the answer I got is, if in fact the landlord reports to the major credit reporting bureaus, which doesn't happen a lot, right? Landlords oftentimes don't take it to the step of reporting. There are some requirements that we need to have in terms of getting information from the tenant up front that allows us to do that. So it doesn't happen oftentimes. However, if they go ahead and report, an eviction will stay on their credit report for 7 years. 7 years. And the Fannie and Freddie typically don't allow you to have a new mortgage if there's an eviction or a foreclosure. Well, this is really more foreclosure. So when it went to foreclosure, like the eviction from a sale, for 7 years. FHA is 3 years, but evictions themselves typically stay on your credit report for 7 years. Sorry, John, go ahead.
No, no worries. I was also gonna ask, let's say a client doesn't have the best credit. What do like we include in like the personal letters? If we wanted to like to speak on their behalf.
I think the answer to that is anything that's non-confidential, which means I would have them. For me, I like having the tenant or the buyer write the letter, send it to me. If they're missing something, I'll kind of ask some questions if they want to adapt it. I've moved away from having us write the letters on people's behalves, just because you can't decide one way or the other what is confidential or is not confidential. And so instead of guessing, just have them write it. You pass it along. And what I will say is, if tenants have crappy credit, there are other ways for them to still be appealing, right? And it can be some kind of a personal letter appealing to the landlord's better side. Some landlords don't have a better side, and so therefore, just an appeal sometimes doesn't go very far. You do have the opportunity, if the tenant candidate has cash and just crappy credit, you do have the opportunity to prepay rent to an escrow account, right? You can't prepay rent to the landlord, but you can prepay rent to an escrow account. We have a service that sets that up. We'll hold the money for tenants and pay the monthly rent. It costs them $25 a month for that service, which they pay up front. But we have that. Attorneys have some attorneys offer that as well. You'll pay way more typically if you give that to an attorney for that same service. But the other opportunity is to have somebody co-sign, which I don't suggest anybody ever do. However, for clients, it is an opportunity. If they have a parent or a sibling or whoever who's willing to co-sign, it is another way to kind of get around some of the crappy credit that might exist. Does that answer that question, John? Did I answer the right question? Yeah, okay. Anybody have any other solutions to crappy credit that I didn't mention? No. And again, just don't forget that don't be the judge of credit, right? So you may see a 650 score and say, oh man, that's crappy credit. And the landlord's more than happy to address 650. And so if you now go in and say, you know what, it's a great guy, but he has really crappy credit, and the landlord's like 650, like what? So you're planting seeds now that didn't need to be planted. Allow people to make their own determinations about what credit scores they're looking for. If it says right in the listing, 720 required, and your client has a 650, then you can simply preempt any conversation around it by saying, hey, here's the story, here's the credit, we know it's less than the 720, here's what we're looking to do to mitigate through that. Does that make sense to the landlord? But my point is, if there's nothing stated, don't make the determination that your client has crappy credit scores just based on what you think are positive or negative scores, because you may be opening a can of worms that didn't need to be opened. Chris.
So we have the ability here to potentially make an offer on behalf of a tenant for a rental to prepay rent, so they can escrow, like I wrote offers last year, they were going to pay the rent all up front and still didn't get accepted. So I can have a potential tenant escrow 6 months of rent or a year's worth of rent with us, and the tenant pays $25 a month for that service, and we'll pay the landlord directly.
Correct.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah, and the only thing in all that is that the fee. So if it's 6 months of rent and it's $25 a month, that $150 is due upfront, right? It's due at lease signing, and it's non-refundable, right?
Okay.
So we get our fee up front, then we write the checks to the landlords on behalf of the tenant. because again, the landlord is unable to accept anything more than 2 months,
Gotcha.
because the 2 month security rule, even if you say, no, it's 2 months security plus 6 months rent, the state doesn't look at it that way. The state looks at it as the landlord is now accepting 8 months of rent. And anything more than the 2 months is prohibited. So if you use a third party, like us, like our escrow account, that's a third party. You deposit it with us, we write the check, and that typically will, it's received some good thumbs up because it is a third party, and it's it's not, oh, my sister Mary will write you the check. It's an incorporated organization with roots in the community that has bricks and
Yeah.
mortar, right? There's people you can touch, and you can go online and look at us and whatnot. So it's a powerful tool.
Yeah, I wish I was more aware, because I think because it's presenting the offer saying, they'll prepay this rent, then who knows what the other side's thinking, or what the listing agent's communicating, and or that landlord, they might be thinking, oh, we need to get attorneys involved and do this whole process. But if I can say, hey, we have a third party service, and can show like this is easily done, no problem, and verify it, it may go better.
Agreed.
I have two questions.
Yes.
My first question is, say I have a unit, there's a unit that's going to become available in February, but my tenant wants, the landlord is requesting that we leave the security deposit to hold the unit. What happens in that case? Do I give them the security deposit? Do we hold the security deposit? How does that work?
There's no really rule or law around that specific scenario. A lot of these things are just simply based on what the landlord and the tenant have agreed to or negotiated, right? And so if the landlord is looking for those funds to come to them pre-lease, now, so I personally wouldn't, if it was my money as the tenant, I wouldn't expect that my money was released to a landlord until I actually had a lease, even if the lease doesn't start until February 15th. If it's a pre-signed lease and it starts a couple of months from now, well, then I can understand my security being sent to the landlord. If there's no lease, again, me personally, I would prefer to have a third party hold those monies. But if we're going to hold the monies for something where there's no lease in place yet, we need to have some kind of an escrow agreement in place that everyone has signed, and everyone means the landlord, the tenant, and me, so that everyone's clear about what that money is in escrow for and how it comes out.
Okay. Now, my second question is, I had a listing last week. This lady was calling me over. I'm running over to her house and we're talking, and I emailed her the smart the MLS form, that the data input, and I filled it out briefly because it wasn't my first rental listing. I filled it out briefly, but she then took the document apart and went in and was like, okay, you didn't put that I have ceiling fans in this bedroom. You didn't put she was like, you didn't state that the commission is to be split between you and the seller's agent. Like, she just took this form completely apart, sent it back to me in an email, and was like, add this, and this in. How important is that form? Because I didn't fill it out in detail before. Like, she wanted me to put everything there. Like, oh, they had to have a credit score above 750. And I was trying to explain to her, nobody's going to see this form but myself and the MLS. And she's like, well, if you want my signature on it, it needs to be 100% accurate. And I lost the listing.
Yeah. So what I would say is those data input forms are, they are way more important than most of you want to make them. And that's across our industry, unfortunately, right? And the reason they're important is because they are the communication tool about this property and what it offers, and between the owner of the property and you as the listing agent, whether it's a for sale property or a listing or a rental listing. It is that tool that gives the seller or the landlord input into how things show up on the MLS. So for the future, what I would do is I would fill it out. If you want to fill it out and kind of get it going and send it off, that's fine. Send it off though with the instructions of, look, Mr. or Mrs. Owner person, right? Whether you're a landlord or you're going to sell the property, you're the owner. Please note, I need you to now be really clear about what is here and what is not, right? Because here's the thing, as listing agents, we don't own the property. So we've been through it once, or we've been through it twice, or we've been through it 9 times. But even still, you're not going to remember every single ceiling fan. You're not going to remember where this hardwood floor is and all that stuff. Even with good notes, you miss something. That's why I use that form and encourage you to, as here's what I've put down. Now it's your job, owner person, to go through and fill in anything I've missed, fill in any instructions that you think are important. If it's a rental listing and they want credit scores listed on the MLS, great, let's have that conversation. There's pros and cons to listing that. Let's have those conversations, but write that on in there. So that way they like this person doesn't come back to you and say, you didn't do a good job because you only filled out a third of it, right? You've proactively said, yes, that's the point. I filled out the things that I took notes on after reviewing your property. Now it's your job to fill in all the rest as the owner of the property.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, because I think when you take it from that side, the form can't be used against you, right? What happened in your scenario is that form got turned around and got used against you as if you weren't doing something. When you turn it around and say, this is the part I do, but for the most part, this is your document to fill out, and then we'll review it together. I think that's the not only the way you use that as a tool, it's a CYA document, right? Because if you take a listing, for example, and you list hardwood floors underneath all the bedrooms upstairs where there's currently carpeting, and someone buys the property and rips up all the carpeting because they want the hardwood floors and there's plywood, and you didn't have the homeowner verify on that data input form all the information and sign it, guess who's on the hook for the hardwood floors? Not the homeowner. Now we're on the hook for the hardwood floors because we made a representation that we didn't have the homeowner verify and sign. So when the homeowner verifies all the ins and outs, the inclusions, the exclusions, the ceiling fans, the drapes, all that stuff that's on that form, like all the nitty gritty, when they review it and they sign their name to it, it also allows us minimally to include the seller in any kind of damages that might get paid out in a scenario like I just said, where there's no hardwood floor and we said there was, because they were as responsible for making that error as we were. Or it allows us to kind of step back and say, look, we represented this property the way you asked us to. You misrepresented that to the buyers. You're going to have to work that out in terms of buying hardwood floor for 4 bedrooms and the hallway.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
So not to freak anybody out, but those data forms, if you're not using them, you really need to be using them, because they are not only a tool for communication, but they are a CYA and an exposure reducer for all of us in terms of any errors that we might make. Because trust me, if you've never written something incorrectly or put it wrong on the MLS, just keep practicing. It will happen. And when you have an extra set of eyes with the seller to kind of go through that, it just allows you to stay cleaner longer. What else, guys? We probably have time for one more question.
Right. Where do we get the certified bank checks from?
Where do you get certified bank checks from?
Yeah, is
From-
that like the tenant that's supposed to go and get that for the offer, or do I?
Yeah,
How does
so
that work?
so most landlords look for certified funds, and we accept personal checks, but the issue with personal checks is that we have a 5 to 7 day waiting period before we'll act on them. So if there's a fast turnaround and there's no certified funds being brought to the table, people have to wait. And where you get them is the bank. The tenants will go to their bank and get certified funds. They just have to ask for a bank check. Some banks charge for them, some don't. But bank checks come from the bank, because what a certified bank check says is the bank actually removes the funds from their account and writes the check, instead of someone writing a check and having it have to be presented, and then a days later or a week later or 2 weeks later, it finally gets to the account. When a certified bank check, they remove the funds immediately from the bank account. So that's why it's certified. That's why we know it's good, because the funds have already been removed.
And like, how does the tenant send that like a copy over to me, or because when I put in the offer to lease, I'll have to put in the certified bank check. So do I have to go and physically grab them, or?
Well, yeah, at some point, someone's going to have to put them into an escrow account, right? So depending on the timing, sometimes it's simpler to have them. When you are on the tenant side, you're going to take direction from the listing agent, right? The
Okay.
listing agency gets to kind of make the rules about how the checks get written and where they go. And so I would ask that question of the listing agent. Sometimes the listing agent will say, just have them written to your escrow account, and then when we have a deal and the time is right, you'll send those monies along. Some listing agents want the checks written to their company's escrow account. Some listing agents want the checks written directly to the landlords up front, right? So you just kind of follow those instructions. If they're written to the landlord up front, I wouldn't deliver the actual checks until there was a signed lease, right? Because then someone has money without performing on the lease.
Mhm.
Does that help answer that?
Kind of. I'm still a little confused.
Yeah,
So
so if you represent Stuart, right, on a property, and you're writing an offer to lease, Stuart should write a check and/or get a bank check for whatever the requirement is. Typically, it's 1 month rent, so $1,200 first month's rent, and then 2 months security, so another $2,400. And let's say in this example, the listing agency doesn't care where the checks are made to. So you would have all those checks, 2 separate checks, one for $2,400 and one for $1,200, written to Keller Williams Realty as trustee. We accept those, we deposit them, we clear the money, and then as soon as, like a week before Stuart's ready to move in and the lease is signed and whatnot, we send the
money over.
to the landlord.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah.
And again, there's a bunch of different right answers to that, because the rules can change depending on the listing agency. Sometimes the listing agent will say, we want the checks written to Coldwell Banker as trustee. And so you advise the client to do it that way, right? The listing agency, whether it's us or somebody else, gets to kind of make those rules based on what the landlord is looking for.
Yeah.
Stuart, bring us home.
As far as an offer to purchase is concerned and 1% binder checks, if my client doesn't yet have an attorney, is it okay to write it out as Keller Williams Prestige Property Trustee and then reissue the check just as a temporary so I could submit the offer? Like, what would you recommend in terms of the binder check, the pay to
Do you mean on a buy side?
on the buy side? Yep.
Yeah, why doesn't the client have an attorney? I would say let's get the client an attorney.
Yeah.
Because that is really the path.
Yeah. I know we don't
the-
accept checks anymore. No. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's not hard to have the client get an attorney. Either give them one or tell them to search one out, make some
Yeah.
phone calls today, and then write that check there. Here's the good news: you can still get the offer accepted. Have them pick your attorney, right? Have them write the check. You're only sending a copy of the check with the offer.
Right.
And then while the offer is being looked at and negotiated and whatnot, over the course of the next 12 or 24 hours, the client can be hiring their attorney. Even if you rewrite the check to a different attorney, as long as the money gets cleared, it doesn't really much matter.
Awesome. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, guys, it is 12:02. That does it for me today. I hope this was helpful. Do watch and let me know what additional, you can just send me an email or shoot me a text. If other Q&A things like this would be helpful to you, tell me the topics that you want me to cover, and I'll put weekly Q&As on the calendar for the rest of the month and into January if it's helpful. So just let me know what topics you want Q&As on, and we'll go from there. We'll see you. Have a great weekend if I don't talk to you.
Have a
Thank
good one,
you.
Rick.
Sure
Bye,
thing.
Rick.
Bye-bye.
Good weekend.